Well, I think the Port Costa Road is a story in itself. I mean, the old Snake Road, as they called it. But I used to play in an orchestra in Vallejo, and Keith Kimball's orchestra. And it was the old type of music where, you know, you had about 5 trumpets and 5 trombones and, you know, and all kinds of reeds. And it was a huge band, and we played all the old Tommy Dorsey arrangements and Benny Goodman arrangements. Anyway, it was fun. But I was always late for practice, and I'd take the Carquinez Bridge rather than wait for the ferry. And so it turned out that that road, you know, was a death trap. If you took it too fast, you'd find yourself down a chasm. But in any event, when we delivered wine down to these little Italian stores from the DeGardi winery in Martinez, Ernie and I would stop along the way, and I mentioned earlier, have a sandwich and a glass of wine and pop open one of his father's wine bottles. But we delivered to these old Italian, as I say, stores, delicatessen stores, and they'd always give us some bread, and you know, it's so friendly in those days. And of course, as you know, the old Italians that moved into Crockett didn't like the name Crockett. I mean, that was American. And so they started another little city called Valona. So there's 2 cities. I don't know whether you know this or not. There's Crockett and Valona. Valona is all the Italians, and it's down by the railroad tracks and extends along. And there's still stores and things called Valona in there. And yeah, and so, as I say, there was a little prejudice in there. But the other thing about Crockett and Port Costa, of course, is the old ferry boat. You know, the steam trains used to, and my mother used to tell stories about going down to visit some friends that she had in Port Costa, and they would sit up in these houses that overlooked the train tracks, and there was just this huge mesh of tracks that would switch back and forth, and these little switch engines were busy tearing down these trains and shooting them onto this huge ferry boat. I think you have a picture of the old ferry boat. It was one of the largest. It was the largest ferry boat in the world, and of course they put a whole train on board this ferry boat. I mean, imagine breaking a train down and switching back and forth and getting these cars on a ferry boat. It must have been just an enormous effort to do that, you know, and puffing and chugging. And
of course, you remember the ferries out of Martinez.
I remember. Well, I was teaching a course for UC, not UC, San Francisco State University in Benicia, and one of the challenges was to make the right connection with the ferry boat, because the class started, you know, and I think it was, and as a matter of fact, Mary Giannini was an old teacher in Martinez, and she went over to Benicia and became one of the administrators, and so she heard I was teaching at San Francisco State, and she wanted me to teach a course for them over there in science, so I did. And then, but as I say, making that ferry boat just at the right time. And I can recall, you know, having a tray of slides. This is a pedagogical joke, I guess. Anyway, having a tray of slides all arranged properly, that, you know, in sequence to what I was going to lecture about, and carrying them downstairs in a big gust of wind coming in, blowing the slides all over the bottom deck of the ferry boat. No, in any event, it was a great period of time in the ferry boat. As a matter of fact, just one story about the ferry boat. We used to swim down at the end of the wharf, and one of the tricks, you young people should take note, one of the tricks was to dive into the wave that the ferry boats brought in with them, because if you missed it and got it wrong, you were buried in mud. Because you had to hit that wave just right. But we used to dive off the pilings, but it was a great place to swim if you could avoid the pollution.
Was there pollution
at
that time?
Very much so. Yeah, this was still in the 30s. Yeah, 37, 35, 36, 37.
What was the pollution from? Was it sediment coming down?
Yeah, and the pipe was, the sewage pipe was just right up there. Yeah.
And the canneries were right down.
And the canneries out there, and so it wasn't pleasant, but it served to cool off in a hot summer.
You've been talking about doing a lot of collecting along the creek and Snake Road. Can you maybe mention some of your most valued things that you collected, and maybe also how you've seen animal life change over the past 70 years?
Right. One of my favorite fossils is a Pecten raymondi. Pecten is the shell symbol for what are those? Scallops. Scallop is a pecten, and I have a nice big fossil of that. That's one of my prizes. I mean, you don't find those every day, especially in good shape. And another one is a little spiral thing that I have a whole rock full of those snails. But my prize collection, I was more of a microbiologist and a micropaleontologist, and so most of the little animalcules are like Quinquelaquilina and things you never heard of, Textilaria. I'm giving a lecture now, but they're protozoans. They're actually Sarcodina. They're related to the amoeba, and they have a shell on them. And every one of them has a remarkably different, every species has a remarkably different shape, and so that's why they're very distinctive in being able to classify. As far as the vegetation and that kind of thing, I think most of the shame of it is that it was, cut down and eradicated by physical destruction. I don't think much of it was destroyed by air pollution or that kind of thing. And of course, who was the old family that had a big ranch in there? Oh, God.
Snake Road?
Yeah. And outside of Port Costa. I'll think of it and let you know. But anyway, their ranch, to this day, if you take the old road to Port Costa, have you ever taken that road? It's very scenic. And of course, there used to be, I don't know if there still are, but places where it said watch out for cattle, and the cattle would cross the road and they had the right of way. But I think the main thing that I think of to this day is the fact that there were so many stories written about that area in there that it's too bad we don't teach more about it in schools. I think one of the major concerns I have about our environment today is the fact that people don't understand, I think, the amount of pollution that we generate. In other words, we have different kinds of soaps, different kinds of medications, and all of that leaks into our environment, and all of that plays a part in causing us to have illnesses, causing animals, for example, there's different blockers that cause fish not to breed, and so there's a lot of things that are getting into the environment because of our new technologies. One book that I recently read was Radical Evolution, and Radical Evolution deals with the progress of man in developing technology. And the radical evolution, of course, is can man's existence keep up with the development of technology and robotics and that kind of thing, that and computers that overshadow his intellect and ability to evolve concurrent with what's being developed. So that's a good book to read.
Do you think we're doing a good job educating our young people about their environment, or do we still have a lot to do?
We have a tremendous amount to do, but I think we're doing a better job than ever before. I mean, I can remember different teachers. The teacher I was trying to think of at the junior high school level, an old guy, Robinstein. And Robinstein, you know, had a little science club and people studied bugs and animals at the junior high school level. Now, not waiting to come to the high school to take biology. And in the old days, we used to teach biology very pedantically, you know, about you had to learn the classes and the phyla and you know, names of different things. And I in my recent relationships, I'm more concerned about students learning relationships with nature rather than, you know, oh, that's a spotted somebody or other that's flying across the sky. That's important, I mean, you know, and a lot of the old naturalists in the national parks used to have trouble with me because I said, well, you know, try to think about how these animals relate with each other and with man, and try to bring environment to the people's backyards rather than just have environment here at the national park. You know, it's great to go look at the Grand Canyon and talk about all the ages of the strata, but you know, it exists right home here. Matter of fact, this monolith of Thomas Hill. Thomas Hill is the hill just west of us here, and it's a huge piece of sandstone, Miocene in age, but for a long time it was classified wrong because a fossil had rolled down the hill, and it still exists in some of the old maps I have as a wrong age. But you know, that's the interrelationship I think that we're not doing as much with as we could. Is, you know, how important it is to know about the origin of our environment, where it looks as if it's going, and of course global warming fits into that pretty well.
Well, Mario, what accomplishments are you, I mean, you've talked about so many things that you have done in your life. What accomplishments are you most proud of?
Well, recent accomplishment is getting a sewer out to Alhambra Valley. And you know, it's still in the process, and so it's not yet accomplished. But I really, there are certain books I've written that I'm very proud of. I wrote Chem Study with Glenn T. Seaborg at the University of California, and we had a very interesting group of people. There were some very well-known scientists associated with the project, and we wrote this book that teachers need to go back to school to be able to teach it. But it's equivalent if you take this course, you've had your first year of college chemistry. And as penance to that, I wrote another book called Action Chemistry. And it's a very simple chemistry book that has been used in teaching people who are not going to be chemists. And I started writing it with people from Sesame Street. So it had Sesame Street characters in it, and it had funny little jokes in it. And most of them have been wiped out because of a war between my publisher, Holt Company, and Sesame Street. They couldn't agree on certain possessive rights. But in any event, it still is very popular, and probably out of print now, but it was for a long time very popular book. That was one thing I was very proud of, and the other thing I'm extremely proud of is the fact that I was able to make a breakthrough for the Navajo Indians. And I built, do you know what a hogan is? You know, the little, well, the school itself was extremely strict with Indians not using their own culture. So I built a whole series of these hogans in a circle, and as the Indians came across the plains with their herds of sheep, they could take their kids out and go live in one of my hogans for a week.
And where was this?
This was in Crown Point, New Mexico.
New Mexico.
Anyway, it turned out that I was having lunch with a gentleman, and he said, "Geez, I just had to go out to a place called Crown Point, New Mexico." And I said, "I know where Crown Point is." He said, "I had to burn down a bunch of hogans."
Oh, no.
Hogans? And he says, "Yeah." He said they were full of vermin, and what had happened is over the years, you know, these things got contaminated. But you know, as they lived, these hogans were fantastically valuable to these Indians, and every other hogan was a place where we had a little museum of artifacts of the old Indian tribes, and so.
So they rescued artifacts before they...
Oh yeah, I mean there was a lot of the stuff that got cleaned out, and they built new facilities. And to their credit, the Bureau of Indian Affairs changed, and I think I'm proud of that as well. Changed their ways of thinking about Indians, because the old way of teaching the Indian was to make them good Americans. Well, they were American long before we ever got here.
They weren't allowed to speak their language.
Oh no,
We
no,
were
they were.
taken to Shea last fall with some British friends. And,
Ah.
yeah.
So it was, yeah, I think I did a little bit of good, and I remember going back to Washington and lecturing to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they were taking my notes, you know, and sliding them under the, and I said, "They're yours, you know, go use them." But it turns out that I think the Indian education system is far different now than it was. But as you noted, there was a very, very brutal kind of relationship between the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indians. And instead of being supportive and helping them develop their culture, they try to destroy it and make them good Americans. Which is concurrent with them being good Indians, if they thought it through. The other thing I guess I'm proud of is the fact that I still blow my horn and have jam sessions with my neighbor, who is a drummer, besides being a metallurgist and a world expert on how to put the right kind of covering on airplanes and that kind of thing. But anyway, Don Boone and I, he brings somebody home from Europe with him that plays clarinet or something, and we have a jam session.
Oh.
So I'm kind of proud that I still can toot the horn a little bit. And if I can convince my wife, I'll bring it down here.
Just for a display.
Yeah.
We have a picture of you on a float, parade coming down Main Street.
Yeah, I remember that.
Shooting your horn, uh-huh.
Yeah, I remember blowing my brains out,
Yeah, shooting your
going down the street in the old garbage truck. That was fun.
So do you think Martinez was a good place to live and to grow up?
The best. Yeah, the best. I wouldn't trade my experiences in Martinez, including the Creek adventures, and I think.
What do you see as the future for Martinez?
Oh, I think the future.
That's a loaded question.
No, it's not.
Yes.
No, I really feel very comfortable with that question, because I think Martinez is going to undergo change. I mean, there's a lot of people in Martinez today who say, let's not change anything. And you know, that's great if you didn't have change waiting to happen a long time ago, and it's going to change anyway. I mean, if you wanted to keep it with the horse and buggies, there are places that don't allow automobiles, and you can go spend a month or a week with the old transportation and the old ways of doing things. But that's just a vacation from reality. And the reality is that Martinez should change, will change, and has to change in order to survive. And what's going to happen is that, you know, the downtown will become more diverse. There will become a lot more, I think, living space in the downtown area. And I think that's the way it used to be. I mean, we used to have 2 or 3 grocery stores on Main Street in Martinez. We had J.C. Penney Company in Martinez. They were competitors of ours, but we allowed them to exist. And then
Probably good for both businesses.
there was enough for everybody. And then, of course, Montgomery Ward was it 3 stories almost. And I mean, this town was very diverse and very bustling. And I think it's going to become such again. But as I indicate, I think we're going to develop down the waterfront. I think we're going to have more housing with condos and people being able to live and work in the same area. And I think that's in the cards, regardless of what people want in terms of no change. It's going to happen anyway. I mean, it's.
How long do you think it'll take to change people's thinking and so they accept that kind of...
Well, the people who are thinking that way now won't exist. You know, mostly the people who are thinking that way are older generations who, you know, I can remember when we built the thing next door here, the county education college district building and the big county building. I mean, these things were aberrations. I mean, they still are, but but you know, it shows that things do change, and it shows that there's as I talk about them in my environmental concepts, there's always a continuity of the old kinds of things, and we'll keep some old kinds of things. For example, I envision the fact that the ferry will exist once again. Only the ferry will go to San Francisco and not just to Benicia. It'll also go to Benicia, but also go to San Francisco. So the ferry will come back, and there are various things that will come back. I think the mouth of the creek, I mean, is going to, you know, the Alhambra Creek mouth is going to be revitalized, maybe be the source for a ferry boat to come in, and maybe developed into some condos down there, and beautiful views of the hills and the river. So there's a great vision for Martinez ahead, and and how long, you know, it's how long it takes to change people, because sometimes thinking never gets changed. It's pretty hard rock thinking. But as people change and as people come in, as new developments happen, it'll work. My son, in one of his dreams, had envisioned a condo down here with Long's drugstore down below, and
That's what they need.
and a parking garage and several stories, and you know, the county offices are going to be located here, so you know, we have genuinely a great need for some kind of community living in the central Martinez, and it'll happen. But
Well, Brett, how are we? I think that's about it. Yeah, it's a good place to end.
All right.
Mario,
Thank you
it's
so
been
much,
such
Mario.
a pleasure.
well,
You were a great parent. You know so much about the history of...
yeah, I'm afraid I rambled a lot.
No, you didn't.
no,
No,
you didn't.
absolutely. And you
Always came back
understand
to it.
that when Brett does his job over here, we'll have a copy of this for you and your family and
Good.
your
Well, that's certainly...
children and grandchildren. Do you have any great-grandchildren?
Sure do.
Great-grandchildren, huh?
Yeah, Andrea just had a baby, which was
you
my...
have Andrea.
Another Andrea. Andrea Telfer.
Oh, really?
She did.
And yeah, do you know her?
My daughters went through Martinez schools and
Ah.
Yeah.
Is that right? Gee, you don't look old enough to have that. No, where did you have a daughter that went through Alhambra?
Yes, both my girls went through
Oh, that's great. What are they doing now?
One works with the Land Trust, the Muir Heritage Land Trust.
Oh.
She's an environmentalist and does their
Jeez.
stewardship. Very busy.
Wow.
About 50 different projects in the area.
Excellent, yeah.
Environmental education, lots of things. And my other daughter went to St. Mary's, actually, and she's in Sacramento. She's working for a musical theater company up there.
No kidding. Bravo.
Planning and different things like that. So.
Bravo.
Great.
Yeah.
Gee, that's great.
Your
I guess
passions.
my other question, one of mine was, I wasn't
get it
going
going
again.
again.
No. Well, it was, you phrased it very delicately about the future of Martinez, and I wasn't sure how, so I'm glad you asked that. And I guess another question I had for you, Mario, because you're a Martinez native and you clearly are so successful in life and had a good basis of education here and carried that, and got such a good education beyond Martinez. And
Sure.
it's one of the things I've just wondered is what does Martinez, how can Martinez improve the future of their young people and their education? And not for the camera so much.
No. But I think actually, you've got a young man here who is very involved with making change, and I think all of education has to change, and I'm very concerned now about how education is not reaching out to young people like your daughters in ways that will make them environmentally conscious, but not just that alone, but thirsty for going on to improve their lives and improve their lives by learning more. I look at my daughter Andrea, my granddaughter Andrea, and my other grandchildren as well, that they don't seem to have that burning desire to really, they went on to college, sure, but they don't have a burning desire, I think, to go further, and I'm wondering how your daughter got involved with the Land Trust, and she must have had some incentives from you.
They worked for the Environmental Protection Agency for most of his career.
Who did?
My husband worked for them.
Oh, EPA?
Agency, yes.
Oh, I'm working with the EPA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on what they call the RAB, Restoration Advisory Board, for the closing down of the ammunition depot.
That's right.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm the vice chairman or something. But
Those titles.
I'm vice of everything. I try not to be chairman. But anyway, as it turns out, the EPA is the only thing that really has a lot to say about what's going on in making that place whole again, because there's a lot of chemicals.
Yet they're saying there's not. I mean, everything I'm with we care Services for Children, and we own land that backs up over on the Kirker Pass side, and all the information we kept saying, we keep getting is, oh no, there's contamination, and they're really in denial about that.
Yeah, no, it's loaded with stuff that they use to control the squirrels. See, because the squirrels would dig into those igloos, and they would, and so there's a lot of those places that were very sensitive, chemically as well as every other way. But EPA is, they're ferreting out all the sins. But there's loads of stuff out there yet.
There has to be.
We had to shut down one of the operations, which was to cap the old dump. There's an old refuse place out there. And I was hoping I could get out there and do some digging and get some treasure. But as it turned out, we were digging up live ammunition out there. And, I can just see somebody building their house close to one of those live bombs and having a rude awakening.
Disaster that would be.
Yeah, so anyway, there's a lot of stuff that they put on that land that needs to be eradicated. So what does your husband do now?
He's retired. Yeah.
He's not with APA now?
No.
How long ago?
I mean, he retired about 10 years ago.
Ah,
Yeah.
no wonder you...
Mostly in water.
Ah.
Drinking water, and also did initially with the water treatment systems that were built all around the country. Get rid of the outfalls or the...
Yeah, oh geez, that's good.
Yeah.
Well,
That's one of the first projects they had was...
Well, we're looking toward eventually having to change our whole structure, because our current technology is to burn the sludge. Well, that's nice because it doesn't go out in the bay, but it goes up in the air, and that's not good. So that's my next project, but I don't know, I should live so long.
Philosophically, though, thinking about that desire to continue learning, I do think about that. I don't know whether it's teachers, parents. Where do you think yours came from, Mario? Was it your parents? Do you think that that in you?
It was my parents. My parents were adamant about higher education, and they thought sure that when I studied geology I was going to find oil under the house. It was a great disappointment that I was not more financially successful. But
biggest reward.
throughout my life I've made enough, and as far as finances are concerned, we've never been a lack of. But I think the thing for kids, I think, is just the fact that learning is good for learning's sake.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's what.
And,
I think about that a lot. I think education is one thing, but education teaches you how to learn, and it's that lifelong wanting to learn. And frankly, I don't always see that in young people. There's just not that. I don't know, is it curiosity,
and yet,
or I don't know what it is.
Well, it is. It's curiosity. But I remember having my own kids when I was doing research in marine biology. My father used to say, "What are you going to do with that?" I said, "Well, I'm going to take it back to the laboratory." He said, "Why don't you eat it?"
That's coming from their, from the period that the Depression era.
Yeah. No.
They were kind of focused in those years.
Yeah, and
putting food on the table.
And they were very interested in my research and my studies, but they didn't have that same curiosity that young people have coming through the laboratory, and they would, it'd be, what are you doing there? I don't know whether do you know what a Eurychus is? Eurychus caupo is a huge worm, and it undulates. It's in a phylum all by itself. Do you know what a Eurychus is? And it's about. He's also called the innkeeper because he lives in this U-shaped hole, and there's a crab specific to him, and there's clams and things that live around this hole because he's pumping water in and out, and the plankton come in and out, and so all these animals live around him because they get this flow. But you bring one of those things into a laboratory, and the kids, my God, what's that? It looks like I hate to say this, but it looks like a big piece of intestine doing some undulating. and
really appeal to kids.
But I use these guys to get cells. I mean, they were hermaphroditic, so you could take female and male cells. And I was doing studies on the strength of fertilization membranes and transport of different chemicals across membranes and that kind of thing. And as you know, as kids come through the laboratory and they see these animals and they see what you're doing, you know, it's an excitement. And I think it's just a shame that they don't have, you know, like your husband would be a great one for this. People going through laboratories or sitting with scientists and working with scientists, and we had that for a while with the National Science Foundation. I coordinated some of that, and then I mentioned this thing about science and humanities. And this was, instead of like going to a science fair and the kids building little trinkets, what they did was they'd write a paper on their research, and then they'd submit the paper. And then we would judge the paper, and if it was good, we'd get some kind of a trip, go back to... No, you'd get
a trip?
Oh, you go back to New York and go back to it was the U.S. Army Research Office that sponsored it. So a lot of money. But
that's part of the problem today, is just that whole thing, money. You know.
Yeah.
They're so.
But you don't need money to put like to bring kids. We used to bring these swarms of kids into the university, and they'd get to meet the Nobel Prize winners, and they'd get to talk to them, and they'd get to see what kind of research was going on, and you hear about a cyclotron. Oh, well, this is a cyclotron.
That exposure.
And this exposure to these wonders of the universe, you know, that are going on, and that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just too bad that we don't have more.
It's a problem for this generation to solve.
Working on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for allowing me to do this.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Let me move this bottle.
All right.